The North's victory in the Civil War in 1865 produced a social revolution in the South. 4 million slaves were freed, and 250,000 Southern whites had died, which was 1/5 of the male population. $2.5 billion worth of property had been destroyed. Slave emancipation did not come in a single moment. In coastal South Carolina and parts of Louisiana and Florida, some slaves gained their freedom as early as the fall of 1861, when Union generals like John C. Fremont, without presidential or congressional authorization, proclaimed slaves in their conquered districts to be free. During the war, slaves by the tens of thousands abandoned their plantations and flocked to the Union lines. Black soldiers in the Union Army and their families automatically gained freedom. Many slaves in Texas did not formally hear about freedom until June 19, 1865, which is why Juneteenth continues to be celebrated as Emancipation Day throughout the Southwest. Many slaves in the border states that remained in the Union, Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri, were not freed until December 1865, 8 months after the end of the Civil War, when the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was ratified. Former slaves' emancipation was a moment of exhilaration, fear, and uncertainty. While some greeted the announcement of freedom with jubilation, others reacted with stunned silence. Response to the news of emancipation ranged from exhilaration and celebrations to mistrust and fear. In Choctaw County, Mississippi, former slaves whipped a planter named Nat Best to retaliate against his former cruelties. In Richmond, Virginia, some 1,500 ex-slaves gathered in the Free African Church to sing hymns. A parade in Charleston attracted 10,000 spectators and featured a black draped coffin bearing the words, "Slavery is dead." A northern journalist met an ex-slave in North Carolina and walked 600 miles searching for his wife and children, who had been sold 4 years before. But many freedmen and women felt a deep uncertainty about their status and rights. Ex-slaves express their newly won freedom in diverse ways. Many couples, forbidden to marry during slavery, took the opportunity to formalize their unions. Others, who had lived apart from their families on separate plantations, were finally free to reside with their spouses and children. As an expression of their freedom, many freed men dropped their slave names, adopted new surnames, and insisted on being addressed as Mr. or Mrs. Many black women withdrew from field labor to care for their families. Many ex-slaves left farms or plantations for towns and cities where freedom was freer. Across the South, former slaves left free, white-dominated churches and formed independent black congregations, founded schools, and set up mutual aid societies. They also held freedmen's conventions to air grievances, discuss pressing issues, and press for equal civil and political rights. Shocked at seeing former slaves transformed into free women and men, many Southern whites complained of betrayal and ingratitude when freed men, former slaves, left their plantation, revealing slave owners' capacity for self-deception. One former master complained that, quote, "those we loved best and who loved us best, as we thought, were the first to leave us," unquote. In many parts of the South, the end of the war was followed by outbursts of white rage. White mobs whipped, clubbed, and murdered ex-slaves. In contrast, the vast majority of former slaves refrained from vengeance against former masters. Instead, they struggled to achieve social independence by forming separate lodges, newspapers, and political organization. Reconstruction was a time of testing, when freed men probed the boundaries and possibilities of freedom. Every aspect of Southern life was subject to redefinition, from forms of racial etiquette to the system of labor that would replace slavery.